The dust kicked up in angry little clouds as Tessa Thornton's bare feet stumbled across the scorching main street of Bentonville, Arkansas. Her arms bound behind her back with rough hemp rope that bit into her wrists with every jarring step. The August sun of 1879 beat down mercilessly, turning the packed earth into a griddle that seared her soles. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation burning through her chest as townspeople lined the wooden sidewalks to watch her public shaming. She had been accused of stealing bread from the general store, a crime she had not committed, but her word meant nothing against that of Marcus Webb, the store owner's son who had propositioned her the week before, and taken her rejection as a personal insult worthy of revenge. Tessa kept her chin up despite the jeers and whispers, her dark hair hanging in sweaty tangles around her face, her simple cotton dress torn at the shoulder from where the deputy had grabbed her that morning. She had been sleeping in the room above the seamstress shop where she worked when they had burst in, dragging her from her bed before dawn with accusations, and no chance to even put on her worn boots. The seamstress, Mrs. Fletcher, had tried to intervene, but the deputy had warned her against interfering with the law. Now Tessa was paying the price for Marcus Webb's wounded pride, forced to walk the length of town twice while the sheriff read her supposed crimes aloud for all to hear. Her feet were already blistering, the skin on her heels splitting open as she was prodded forward by Deputy Hammond's rifle barrel pressed against her spine. She stumbled, nearly falling, and bit back a cry of pain as her weight came down hard on her right foot. The deputy laughed, a cruel sound that made her stomach turn. She could see the end of the street ahead, where she would be forced to turn around and make the walk back, but it seemed impossibly far away, shimmering in the heat like a mirage. That was when she heard the horse, the steady clip-clop of hooves that grew louder as they approached from behind. Tessa did not turn to look, keeping her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to give the growing crowd any more satisfaction from her misery. But then the horse was beside her, and a voice rang out, deep and commanding, cutting through the jeers like a knife through butter. "That's enough." The deputy stopped walking, and Tessa swayed on her feet, grateful for even a moment's respite. She turned her head slightly and saw him then, the man on the horse. He sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. His hat was pulled low over his face, shadowing his features, but she could see the hard set of his jaw, the way his mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, his boots scuffed and well-worn, a bandana tied around his neck, and a revolver holstered at his hip that he did not reach for, but that everyone noticed nonetheless. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Deputy Hammond said, puffing out his chest in a poor imitation of authority. "This here's official business. Girl's a thief, and she's getting what she deserves." The cowboy's eyes flicked to Tessa, taking in her bare feet, the blood already staining the dust beneath them, the rope around her wrists, the tears she was fighting so hard to keep from falling. Something in his expression shifted, a flash of anger so intense it made the deputy take a step back. "What'd she steal?" the cowboy asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Bread from Webb's general store," the deputy said, regaining some of his bluster. "Caught red-handed she was." "Caught by who?" "By Marcus Webb himself. Saw her sneaking out the back with a whole loaf." The cowboy looked at Tessa again, and this time she met his gaze, lifting her chin in silent defiance even as her legs trembled beneath her. She saw him take in the state of her dress, the way it hung on her too thin frame, the hollows beneath her cheekbones that spoke of too many meals missed. His jaw tightened. "She confess. Don't need to. Marcus Webb's word is good enough." "Marcus Webb's word," the cowboy repeated, and there was something dangerous in his tone now. That the same Marcus Webb who was run out of Fort Smith 2 years back for marked cards. The deputy's face flushed red. Now you listen here. No, you listen. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. He was tall, Tessa realized, well over 6 feet, and the way he moved spoke of a man who knew how to handle himself in a fight. I don't know what kind of town this is, but where I come from, we don't torture women based on the word of a known cheat. She's getting her legal punishment, the deputy insisted, but his voice had lost its certainty. Legal? The cowboy's laugh was harsh. You burned the soles off her feet on sun-baked ground and you call that legal? Where's your sheriff? Sheriff Daniels is over at the courthouse. Then I suggest you go get him, because this stops now. The crowd had grown quiet, watching the confrontation with the avid interest of people who smelled a scandal brewing. The deputy looked around, seeming to realize for the first time that public opinion was shifting. Several of the women in the crowd were whispering behind their hands, and old Mr. Peterson, who ran the feed store, was shaking his head in disapproval. I can't just, the deputy started, but the cowboy had already moved past him to Tessa. Turn around, he said to her, his voice gentler now. She obeyed and felt his fingers working at the knots binding her wrists. The rope fell away, and she brought her hands forward, rubbing at the raw marks the hemp had left behind. Can you stand much longer? I don't have a choice, she said, her voice hoarse from the dust and the heat. Yeah, you do. He knelt down in the dirt in front of her, and before she could process what he was doing, he had pulled off his boots. They were good boots, better than anything she had ever owned, made of quality leather that had been oiled and cared for. He held them up to her. Put these on. I can't. Yes, you can. Put them on. Tessa looked down at her ruined feet, then at the boots, then at his face. His eyes were steady on hers, and she saw no pity there, only a quiet determination that made something in her chest loosen. With shaking hands, she took the boots. They were warm from his feet, too large for her by several sizes, but when she slipped them on they felt like heaven against her blistered skin. The soft leather cushioned her soles, and she nearly wept with relief. The cowboy stood, and Tessa noticed he wore thick wool socks that would at least provide some protection from the ground. But before she could thank him, he had bent down and scooped her up into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped, instinctively putting her arms around his neck to steady herself. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Taking you to see the sheriff. If you're going to be punished, it's going to be done proper with a judge and a fair hearing." He looked at the deputy over her head. "Lead the way, Hammond. Let's go wake up Sheriff Daniels and hear what he has to say about all this." The deputy opened his mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it. With the cowboy carrying Tessa and half the town following along, they made their way to the courthouse, a squat building at the north end of town. Sheriff Daniels was indeed inside, sitting at his desk with his boots propped up, reading a newspaper. He looked up in surprise as the crowd filed in. "What in the blue blazes is going on here?" he demanded, dropping his feet to the floor. "Your deputy was conducting a public punishment without a trial," the cowboy said, still holding Tessa. "Girl's been accused of theft by Marcus Webb, but I'm guessing nobody bothered to investigate whether he was telling the truth." Sheriff Daniels' face darkened as he looked at Deputy Hammond. "Is that true? Did you skip the hearing?" "Marcus said she was guilty, so I figured." "You figured." The sheriff stood up, and Tessa could see he was a big man, gone a bit soft around the middle but still commanding. "Since when do you figure anything, Hammond? We have procedures for a reason." "But Marcus said." "I don't care what Marcus said. You know the rules." The sheriff turned to the cowboy. "You can set her down, friend. What's your name?" "Grant Garrison," the cowboy said, carefully lowering Tessa into a chair. She winced as she sat, her feet throbbing even inside the borrowed boots. I was riding through, saw what was happening. Well, Mr. Garrison, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Hammond here was supposed to bring the girl to me first thing, let me question her and Marcus both before any punishment was decided. He fixed the deputy with a hard stare. Instead, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Marcus was real insistent, Hammond mumbled. I bet he was. Sheriff Daniels pulled out a wooden chair and sat down across from Tessa. Now, miss, what's your name? Tessa Thornton, sir. And did you steal bread from Webb's General Store? No, sir. I did not. She's lying, a voice called from the doorway, and everyone turned to see Marcus Webb pushing his way through the crowd. He was a soft-faced man in his 20s, with slicked-back hair and expensive clothes that looked out of place in the dusty town. I saw her myself, sneaking out the back with the bread under her dress. That's not true, Tessa said, her voice stronger now. I've never stolen anything in my life. I work for Mrs. Fletcher at the seamstress shop. I earn my keep. Then why would Marcus accuse you? The sheriff asked. Tessa hesitated, feeling the weight of all the eyes on her. She did not want to say it, did not want to admit what had happened, but Grant Garrison's presence beside her gave her courage. Because I refused his advances, sir. Last week, he cornered me in the alley behind the shop and tried to kiss me. When I pushed him away and told him no, he said I would regret it. The room erupted in murmurs. Marcus' face went red, then white. She's lying. She's a thief and a liar. Funny thing about that, Grant said, his voice cutting through the noise. I stopped by Webb's General Store on my way here. Talked to a young boy who works there, stocking shelves. He said he saw Marcus take a loaf of bread himself yesterday morning, said Marcus told him it was for his mother. But Marcus' mother died 3 years ago, didn't she? The sheriff's eyebrows went up. That she did. So I'm thinking, Grant continued, that maybe Marcus took that bread himself, then claimed Tessa stole it. Easy enough to do when you're the owner's son and she's just a seamstress with no family to speak for her. That's a serious accusation, Sheriff Daniels said, but he was looking at Marcus now and his expression was thoughtful. It's a lie, Marcus sputtered. That boy doesn't know what he's talking about. The boy seemed pretty sure, Grant said. Even told me what time it happened. Said it was right after opening, around 7 in the morning. That match up with when you claim you saw Tessa stealing. Marcus' mouth worked, but no sound came out. The sheriff stood up slowly. Marcus, I think you better come with me. We're going to have a long talk, you and I, about bearing false witness. You can't believe him over me. My father, your father, is a good man who will be real disappointed to hear about this, the sheriff said firmly. Now come on. As the sheriff led a protesting Marcus away, with Deputy Hammond trailing behind looking thoroughly chastened, the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about the morning's drama. Tessa sat in the chair, her whole body trembling now that the adrenaline was fading, leaving her feeling hollow and exhausted. Grant crouched down in front of her, his eyes level with hers. You all right? He asked. I don't know, she said honestly. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, hot and fast, and she could not stop them. I thought I was going to have to walk that street again. I thought no one would believe me. Hey, he said gently, reaching up to brush a tear away with his thumb. It's over now, you're safe. Because of you. She looked down at the boots on her feet. I don't even know how to thank you, you didn't have to do any of that. Yes, I did, he said simply. I couldn't just ride by and watch that happen. Most people would have. Then most people are cowards. He stood up, offering her his hand. Come on, let's get you home, get those feet looked at proper. She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. The boots felt strange, enormous on her, but she was grateful for them. As they walked out into the sunlight, Mrs. Fletcher came rushing up, her round face creased with worry. "Oh, Tessa, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry, dear. I tried to stop them, but they wouldn't listen." "It's all right, Mrs. Fletcher," Tessa said, managing a weak smile. "This is Mr. Garrison. He helped me." Mrs. Fletcher looked at Grant with such gratitude that he appeared almost embarrassed. "Bless you, sir, bless you. Tessa is a good girl, the best worker I've ever had. I knew she didn't steal anything." "She's going to need some rest," Grant said, "and something for her feet. They're burned pretty bad. I have salve upstairs and clean bandages. Come, come." Mrs. Fletcher ushered them toward the seamstress shop, a narrow building sandwiched between the butcher and the bank. Tessa climbed the stairs to her small room above the shop slowly, each step an effort. The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small trunk that held all her possessions, but it was clean and it was hers, the first real home she had known since her parents died of fever 4 years ago. She sat on the edge of the bed while Mrs. Fletcher bustled around, fetching water and cloths and a tin of strong-smelling salve. Grant stood by the door, looking uncertain for the first time since Tessa had met him. "You can come in," Tessa said. "I think we're past formalities at this point." He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his whole face, making him look younger, less hard. He stepped into the room, having to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling. "Guess that's true." Mrs. Fletcher helped Tessa remove the boots carefully, revealing the damage beneath. Her feet were a mess of blisters and burns, the skin peeling away in places, blood crusted in the cracks. Tessa looked away, feeling sick, but Grant knelt down beside Mrs. Fletcher. "I've dealt with burns before," he said. "Out on the range you see all kinds of injuries. Let me help." Together they cleaned Tessa's feet with cool water, then applied the salve with gentle hands. Tessa bit her lip against the sting, determined not to cry out. Grant wrapped her feet in soft bandages, his large hands surprisingly deft. "There," he said when he was finished. "Keep those clean and dry for a few days. Stay off your feet as much as you can." "I have to work," Tessa said. "I can't afford—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Fletcher interrupted. "You'll rest until you're healed and I'll pay you just the same. After what you've been through, it's the least I can do." Tessa felt fresh tears welling up, overwhelmed by the kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. Mrs. Fletcher patted her hand, then stood up, gathering the soiled cloths. "I'll leave you two to talk. Mr. Garrison, you're welcome to stay for supper tonight if you'd like. It's the least I can offer for what you did." "That's kind of you, madam. I'd be honored." After Mrs. Fletcher left, Grant pulled up the room's single chair and sat down, stretching out his long legs. Without his boots, Tessa noticed his socks had holes worn through the toes. She felt a stab of guilt. "Your boots," she said. "You should take them back." "Not until your feet are healed and you have a pair of your own," he said firmly. "Besides, I've got spares in my saddlebags. These were just my good pair." "Your good pair," she repeated, "and you gave them to a stranger. You weren't just a stranger. You were someone who needed help." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Can I ask you something? After everything you've done for me, you can ask me anything. Do you have anyone, family I mean, anyone who can look out for you?" Tessa shook her head. "My parents died when I was 16. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I have an aunt in Missouri, but we've never been close. I came to Bentonville because Mrs. Fletcher was advertising for a seamstress apprentice, and I've been here ever since. That's hard, being alone in the world. What about you?" she asked. "Do you have family?" A shadow passed across his face. "Had a brother once, lost him in the war. My parents have both passed on too. I've been drifting mostly, working ranches here and there, going where the work takes me." "That sounds lonely." It can be, he admitted, but it's also free. No ties, no one to answer to, just me and my horse and the open road. They talked as the afternoon light slanted through the small window, painting golden squares on the worn floorboards. Grant told her about his life on the range, about cattle drives and wild storms and nights sleeping under more stars than she could imagine. Tessa told him about learning to sew from her mother, about the satisfaction of taking formless cloth and shaping it into something beautiful and useful. She found herself laughing at his stories, forgetting for a while about the pain in her feet and the humiliation of the morning, when Mrs. Fletcher called them down for supper. Grant helped Tessa down the stairs, supporting her weight so she did not have to put too much pressure on her bandaged feet. The meal was simple but hearty: stew thick with vegetables and chunks of beef, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and apple pie for dessert. Grant ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting Mrs. Fletcher until the older woman blushed with pleasure. "Will you be staying in Bentonville long, Mr. Garrison?" Mrs. Fletcher asked as she poured coffee. "I wasn't planning on it," he said. "I was heading south, looking for work on one of the big ranches down that way." "Well, if you need a place to stay for a few days, there's a room at the boarding house just down the street. Mrs. Chen runs it, and she keeps a clean establishment. I appreciate the recommendation." He glanced at Tessa, and something in his eyes made her heart skip. "Maybe I will stick around for a bit. Make sure everything gets sorted out proper with the sheriff." That night, after Grant had left for the boarding house and Mrs. Fletcher had retired to her own room, Tessa lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She kept seeing Grant's face as he had knelt before her in the street, the determined set of his jaw as he had faced down the deputy. She kept feeling the strength of his arms as he had carried her, the gentleness of his hands as he had bandaged her feet. She barely knew him, and yet he had shown her more kindness in a few hours than most people had in her entire life. Sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, she dreamed of storm-gray eyes and a voice like distant thunder. The next morning, Tessa woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of voices downstairs. She sat up carefully, testing her feet. They were still tender, still painful, but not as bad as she had feared. She wrapped them in fresh bandages from the supplies Mrs. Fletcher had left, then pulled on a clean dress and made her way downstairs, moving slowly. Grant was in the shop, standing by the front counter talking to Mrs. Fletcher. He had cleaned up. She noticed his hair was damp and combed back, his face freshly shaved, revealing a strong jaw and a small scar near his left ear. He wore a different shirt, deep blue instead of the dusty brown from yesterday, and his spare boots were on his feet. He looked up as she came down the stairs and smiled. "Morning. How are the feet?" "Better, thank you." She joined them at the counter, grateful when Mrs. Fletcher pulled over a stool so she could sit. "What are you doing here so early? I wanted to check on you, and I have news." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Sheriff Daniels came by the boarding house first thing. Turns out he had a long talk with Marcus Webb last night. Marcus confessed to the whole thing, taking the bread, framing you, everything. The sheriff wanted me to give you this." Tessa unfolded the paper and read the neat script. It was an official statement from the sheriff, declaring her innocent of all charges, and noting that Marcus Webb had been fined and ordered to make a public apology. Marcus' father had also insisted that Marcus write a personal letter of apology to Tessa and pay her restitution for her pain and suffering $50, a sum that made Tessa's eyes widen. $50, she whispered. "I've never had that much money at once in my life." "It's what you're owed," Grant said. "You could have died out there yesterday if things had gone differently. That son doesn't play around." Mrs. Fletcher was reading over Tessa's shoulder, making approving noises. Good. It's about time Marcus learned there are consequences for his actions. His poor father must be beside himself. Sheriff said old Mr. Webb was furious, Grant confirmed. Said he's thinking about sending Marcus east to live with relatives, get him away from here before he causes any more trouble. The thought of Marcus leaving filled Tessa with relief so profound it made her dizzy. She had been dreading seeing him again, dreading the whispers and the looks that would have followed her through town. But if he left, if he was truly gone, then maybe she could start to put this all behind her. "Thank you," she said to Grant, reaching out to touch his hand where it rested on the counter. "For everything." His hand turned under hers, his fingers curling around hers briefly before he let go. "You don't have to keep thanking me, Tessa." "Yes, I do. You changed everything." Over the next few days, Grant became a fixture around the seamstress shop. He claimed he was just making sure Tessa recovered properly. But Mrs. Fletcher caught the way he looked at her, the way his whole face softened when Tessa entered a room. And she saw too the way Tessa's eyes followed Grant when he moved, the way she blushed when he smiled at her. Grant made himself useful, fixing the loose board on the front steps that Mrs. Fletcher had been complaining about for months, oiling the hinges on the shop door so they no longer squeaked, even repairing a leak in the roof that had been causing water stains on the ceiling of the storage room. In return, Mrs. Fletcher insisted he take his meals with them, and slowly Tessa learned more about the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. He had grown up on a small farm in Missouri. He told her one evening as they sat on the front porch watching the sun set. His father had been a farmer, breaking his back working land that never quite yielded enough. His mother had been a teacher before she married, and she had taught both Grant and his brother to read and write, unusual for boys who were expected to spend their days in the fields. "She used to say education was the one thing nobody could take from you," Grant said, his voice soft with memory. "That you could lose your land, your money, everything, but what you knew stayed with you always." She sounds like a wise woman. She was. When the war started, my brother Jacob enlisted right away. He was older than me by 3 years, always the brave one, always charging ahead. I wanted to go with him, but Ma made me promise to wait, to stay and help with the farm. Jacob died at Shiloh in '62. Never even made it through his first battle. Tessa reached over and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I'm so sorry. I enlisted after that against my parents' wishes. I was angry, wanted revenge, I guess. Spent the rest of the war fighting, saw things I wish I could forget. When I came home in '65, everything had changed. The farm was failing, my father was sick, my mother had aged 20 years in the 3 I'd been gone. Pa died that winter. Ma followed him the next spring. I think she just didn't want to be without him anymore. So you started drifting." "Yeah, sold the farm, took what little money there was and headed west. That was 14 years ago now. I've worked ranches from Texas to Montana, done about every job there is to do with cattle. I'm good at it, good with horses too, but I never stayed anywhere long. Always felt like I was looking for something, you know? I just didn't know what." "Do you know now?" Tessa asked, her heart beating faster. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'm starting to think maybe I do." They sat in silence after that, hands still clasped, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Tessa felt something shifting inside her, something she had thought was long dead coming back to life. Hope, she realized. He made her feel hope. A week after the incident on the main street, Tessa's feet were healed enough for her to walk without pain. She returned Grant's boots to him one morning, having cleaned and oiled them until they shone. "Thank you," she said, holding them out to him. "I'll never forget what you did for me." He took the boots but set them aside immediately. "Tessa, I've been thinking." "About what?" "About staying. Here in Bentonville, I mean." He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I talked to Mr. Patterson at the feed store. He said the Double R Ranch about 10 miles outside of town is looking for a foreman. Good position, steady pay, a cabin that comes with the job. I'm going to ride out there tomorrow and talk to the owner." Tessa's heart leapt. "You're thinking about settling down?" "I'm thinking about a lot of things." He stepped closer to her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Mostly I'm thinking about you. About how when I look at you, I don't feel like drifting anymore. I feel like I've found what I've been looking for all these years." "Grant," she whispered. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a week. But Tessa, I've lived long enough to know when something is real and when it's not. This is real. What I feel for you is real." She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rasp of stubble against her palms, the warmth of his skin. "I feel it too. From that first moment in the street, when you stood up for me when no one else would. You made me believe that good men still existed in this world." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, his hands coming up to frame her face just as she was framing his. It was a perfect kiss, full of promise and possibility, and when they broke apart they were both smiling. "I'll get that job," he said with quiet determination. "I'll build us a life here if you'll have me." "I'll have you," she said. "I'll absolutely have you." Grant rode out to the Double R Ranch the next day, and when he came back that evening, he was grinning so wide Tessa could see it from the shop window. He swung down from his horse and bounded up the steps, catching Tessa up in his arms and spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "I got it," he said. "The job's mine. Mr. Roberts, the owner, he said I came with the best references he'd ever seen. Turns out I worked with his brother-in-law up in Kansas 5 years back, and the man remembered me. Said I was the hardest worker he'd ever had. I start Monday." "That's wonderful." Tessa threw her arms around his neck and he held her close, burying his face in her hair. "There's more. The cabin's bigger than I expected. 2 rooms, a real fireplace, a good well nearby. Mr. Roberts said I could fix it up however I liked." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes serious now. "Tessa, I know it's too soon to propose proper. I know I should court you for months, do everything right. But I'm not a patient man and life's too short to waste time when you know what you want. I want you. I want to marry you, build a life with you, wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my days." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Grant, I'll marry you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Tessa felt her whole world shift and realign around this moment, around this man who had given her his boots and carried her to safety, and shown her that love could be real and solid and true. They told Mrs. Fletcher that night over supper, and the older woman cried and hugged them both and immediately began planning. They would marry at the church, she insisted, with the whole town invited. She would make Tessa's dress herself, the most beautiful dress anyone had ever seen. It would be the wedding of the season. But Grant and Tessa looked at each other and knew they did not need all that. They did not need a big spectacle or months of planning. They just needed each other and a promise, spoken before God and whatever witnesses they could gather. They were married 3 weeks later in the little white church on the hill above Bentonville. Mrs. Fletcher stood up with Tessa, and Sheriff Daniels stood with Grant. Tessa wore a simple ivory dress that Mrs. Fletcher had indeed made into something beautiful, with tiny buttons down the back and lace at the collar and cuffs. Grant wore a new suit, the first he had owned in years, and when he saw Tessa walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes grew bright with unshed tears. The ceremony was short and sweet. Reverend Thompson spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. Grant's hands shook slightly as he slipped the gold band onto Tessa's finger, a ring he had bought with his first week's wages from the ranch. Tessa's voice was clear and strong as she said her vows, promising to love and honor him all the days of her life. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Grant kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and the small gathering of friends and neighbors erupted in applause. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Chen providing a feast that seemed impossible from her small kitchen. There was roasted chicken and potatoes, fresh vegetables from her garden, bread and butter, and a cake that Mrs. Fletcher had stayed up half the night baking. They ate and drank and danced to the music of old Tom's fiddle, and Tessa felt happiness bubbling up inside her like champagne, effervescent and bright. As the sun began to set, Grant helped Tessa into the wagon he had borrowed from the ranch, and they set off for their new home. The cabin sat on a rise overlooking a creek, surrounded by cottonwood trees that rustled in the evening breeze. Grant had spent every spare moment over the past weeks fixing it up, patching the roof, replacing broken windows, scrubbing the floors until they gleamed. He had built furniture too, a sturdy table and chairs, a chest for storage, and a real bed frame that he had fitted with a new mattress stuffed with fresh hay and covered with quilts Mrs. Fletcher had contributed. He carried Tessa over the threshold, making her laugh, and set her down gently in the middle of their home. The main room held the table and chairs, a fireplace with a good stone hearth, and a shelf for books and dishes. The bedroom was just big enough for the bed and the chest, but it had a window that looked out over the creek, and Tessa knew she would love waking up to that view. "It's perfect," she said, turning to face her husband. Her husband. The words sent a thrill through her. "Grant, it's absolutely perfect." "You're perfect," he said, pulling her close. "I still can't believe this is real, that you're really mine." "I'm really yours," she confirmed, "and you're really mine." They made love that night with the windows open, letting in the cool evening air and the sound of the creek babbling over stones. Grant was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Tessa felt cherished and safe. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the quilts, talking quietly about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Tessa said, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "At least 3 or 4. "I want that too," he said, running his fingers through her hair. "I want to fill this house with love and laughter. I want to be the kind of father mine was steady, reliable there. You will be. You're the best man I've ever known." "I'm just a man, Tessa. I'll make mistakes, but I promise you this: I will always choose you. I will always put you first. I will always come home." She tilted her head up to kiss him. "That's all I need." The first months of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Tessa had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, so different from the structured days at the seamstress shop. She woke before dawn to make Grant breakfast before he rode out to work, and she spent her days tending their small vegetable garden, cleaning, cooking, and slowly making the cabin into a home. She hung curtains she sewed herself, bright yellow gingham that let in the sunshine. She planted wildflowers around the doorstep. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental fireplace oven, producing loaf after loaf until she finally got one that rose properly and did not burn on the bottom. Grant worked long days at the ranch, overseeing the cowboys, managing the herd, helping with everything from branding to fence repair. He came home exhausted most nights, his clothes dusty and his muscles aching, but he never complained. Mr. Roberts was a fair boss, and the work was satisfying in a way that drifting had never been. He was building something here, putting down roots, creating stability. Twice a week, Tessa would ride into town with Grant in the wagon to help Mrs. Fletcher at the shop. The older woman had been worried about managing on her own, but she had found a new apprentice, a young girl named Sarah who was eager to learn. Still, Tessa enjoyed the work, and the extra money she earned helped them save toward the future. On one such trip to town, about 4 months after their wedding, they ran into Marcus Webb. He was loading boxes into a wagon outside his father's store, and when he saw Tessa and Grant, his face went pale. He ducked his head and tried to hurry past, but Grant stepped into his path. "Webb," he said, his voice cold. Marcus looked up, his eyes darting nervously. "Mr. Garrison, Mrs. Garrison." He swallowed hard. I heard you two got married. Congratulations." "No thanks to you," Grant said flatly. I know what I did was wrong. I've been trying to make amends, trying to be better." He looked at Tessa, and she saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "Mrs. Garrison, I know my apology means nothing to you, but I am truly sorry. What I did was despicable. You could have died because of my lies and my pride." Tessa studied him for a long moment. He looked different than she remembered, thinner, older, with shadows under his eyes. His expensive clothes were rumpled, and there was a defeated slump to his shoulders. "I accept your apology," she said finally. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry hatred around with me. I have too much good in my life now to waste energy on the past." Relief flooded Marcus' face. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve." He glanced at Grant. "Your wife is a remarkable woman, Mr. Garrison. You're a lucky man." "Don't I know it?" Grant said, slipping his arm around Tessa's waist. They watched Marcus finish loading his wagon and drive away, and Tessa felt the last bitter remnants of that terrible day dissolve. She was free of it now, truly free, and she could move forward without looking back. Winter came to Bentonville with unusual force that year, bringing bitter cold and several heavy snowfalls that blanketed the landscape in white. The cabin proved snug and warm, and Tessa and Grant spent their evenings by the fireplace, reading aloud to each other from the few books they owned or simply talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of those long winter nights that Tessa realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly time twice now, and her breasts were tender, her stomach queasy in the mornings. She waited until she was certain, then told Grant one evening as they lay in bed. "I'm going to have a baby," she said softly. He went very still beside her. "A baby, you're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I'm sure." He rolled over and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Tessa, oh Tessa, that's the best news I've ever heard." His voice cracked with emotion. "We're going to be parents." "We're going to be parents," she repeated, laughing through tears. "Are you ready for this?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm terrified, but I'm also happier than I've ever been. We're going to have a family, Tessa. A real family." They rode into town the next day to see Doc Harrison, who confirmed what Tessa already knew. She was about 2 months along, which meant the baby would arrive in late summer, probably August. Doc gave her a list of things to eat and things to avoid, warned her about overexerting herself, and sent them home with instructions to come back in a month for another check. The pregnancy was harder than Tessa had expected. She was sick nearly every morning for weeks, barely able to keep food down. Grant hovered anxiously, trying to help but feeling useless in the face of her discomfort. But gradually the sickness passed, and Tessa began to bloom. Her skin glowed, her hair grew thick and lustrous, and her belly swelled with their growing child. Grant was fascinated by every change, constantly marveling at the miracle happening inside his wife. He would press his hands to her belly, feeling for kicks, and his face would light up every time the baby moved. He built a cradle in the barn during his spare moments, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk, carving designs into the headboard horses and flowers and a rising sun. Spring arrived, bringing warmth and new growth. Tessa's garden flourished, and she spent hours tending it, enjoying the feel of the sun on her back and her hands in the earth. She felt connected to something primal and ancient, this cycle of growth and life. One afternoon in May, she was in the garden when she heard riders approaching. She straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw Grant riding toward the cabin with Mr. Roberts and another man she did not recognize. All three dismounted, and Grant hurried over to her. "Everything all right?" she asked, noting the serious expressions on the men's faces. "Fine. Better than fine, actually." He was grinning now, barely able to contain his excitement. "Tessa, this is Mr. James Parker. He owns the Triple J Ranch about 30 miles north of here." The stranger tipped his hat to her. He was an older gentleman, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and a weathered face. "Mrs. Garrison, pleasure to meet you." "Mr. Parker," she acknowledged, confused about why he was here. "Mr. Parker came to talk to me about a business proposition," Mr. Roberts said, "and I wanted Grant here for the discussion." "What kind of proposition?" Tessa asked. Mr. Roberts exchanged a glance with Mr. Parker, then looked at Grant. "Tell her, son, this is your decision to make." Grant took Tessa's hands in his. "Mr. Parker is looking to retire. He wants to sell his ranch, but he wants to sell it to someone who will take care of it, someone who loves the land and the work. He's been asking around, and multiple people recommended me." "Sell his ranch," Tessa repeated slowly. "Grant, we don't have that kind of money." "That's where I come in," Mr. Roberts said. "I'd be willing to back Grant, make him a loan to buy the property. It's a good investment. The Triple J is solid, with good water rights and plenty of grazing land. With hard work, Grant could have it paid off in 10, maybe 15 years. Tessa's mind was racing. A ranch of their own, not just a job, but ownership, legacy, something to pass down to their children. "How big is it?" 2,000 acres, Mr. Parker said. "Ranch house needs some work, but it's structurally sound. Barn, stables, bunkhouse for hired hands. About 300 head of cattle currently, good breeding stock. I'm asking a fair price, and I'm willing to stay on for a few months to help with the transition." "It's a big responsibility," Grant said to Tessa. "Bigger than anything I've ever taken on, but I think I can do it. I think we can do it together." Tessa looked into her husband's eyes and saw hope there, an ambition, and a burning desire to prove himself. She thought about their child, due in just a few months, and about the life they could build on their own land, answering to no one but themselves. "Then I think we should do it," she said. Grant whooped and picked her up, spinning her around before remembering her condition and setting her down carefully. "You mean it." "I mean it. Let's buy a ranch." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Papers had to be signed, money changed hands, and arrangements made for the move. Mr. Roberts threw a going-away party for Grant at the ranch, and all the cowboys came to shake his hand and wish him well. Mrs. Fletcher cried when Tessa told her they were leaving Bentonville, but she was excited for them too, for this new adventure they were embarking on. They moved to the Triple J in late June, with Tessa now heavily pregnant and the summer heat bearing down. The ranch house was bigger than the cabin but showed signs of neglect: peeling paint, sagging shutters, floors that needed refinishing. But it had good bones, and Tessa could see its potential. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs, a large kitchen with a real cookstove, a parlor with windows that looked out over the front pasture, and even a small library that made her heart sing. Mr. Parker was true to his word, staying on to teach Grant the particulars of running the Triple J. The old man had been working this land for 40 years, and he knew every water hole, every fence line, every quirk of the property. Grant soaked up the knowledge like a sponge, riding out at dawn and not returning until after dark, learning everything he could before Mr. Parker left. Tessa threw herself into making the house a home. She cleaned and scrubbed and painted, as much as she could manage in her condition. She hired 2 local women to help with the heavy work, and together they transformed the dusty, neglected rooms into spaces filled with light and warmth. She hung curtains, arranged furniture, planted flowers. She made the smallest bedroom upstairs into a nursery, painting it soft yellow and hanging the cradle Grant had built beside the window. On a sweltering afternoon in mid-August, Tessa's water broke while she was in the kitchen making preserves. Grant had been out checking the south fence line, and by the time one of the hired hands fetched him, Tessa was already in hard labor. He burst into their bedroom to find her pacing, her face contorted with pain, one of the hired women coaching her through contractions. "I'm here," he said, going to her side. "I'm here, Tessa. The baby's coming fast," the woman said. Her name was Alina, and she had delivered half the babies in the county. First ones usually take their time, but this little one is eager. Grant had thought he had known fear during the war, but nothing compared to the terror of watching Tessa in pain and being unable to help. He held her hand, let her squeeze until he thought his bones would break, wiped the sweat from her face, and murmured words of encouragement. It was nearly sunset when their son finally arrived, red-faced and howling his displeasure at being forced from his warm cocoon into the bright, overwhelming world. Alina placed him on Tessa's chest, and both parents stared in awe at the tiny, perfect creature they had created. "A boy," Tessa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Grant, we have a son. He's beautiful," Grant said hoarsely. "You're both beautiful. Tessa, you're amazing." They named him Jacob Grant Garrison after Grant's lost brother and his father. Little Jacob had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes, and from the moment he was born, he had his parents wrapped completely around his tiny fingers. The first year of Jacob's life was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Tessa learned to function on minimal sleep, nursing the baby around the clock while also trying to manage the household. Grant hired 3 cowboys to help with the ranch work, good men who took orders well and pulled their weight. The ranch began to thrive under his management. He made improvements to the water system, rotated the grazing areas to keep the land healthy, and made a good profit when he sold his first herd that fall. By the time Jacob celebrated his first birthday in August of 1881, the Triple J was firmly established, and Grant and Tessa had proven they could make a success of ranching. They threw a party to celebrate both Jacob's birthday and the ranch's first full year under their ownership, inviting neighbors and friends from miles around. Mrs. Fletcher made the trip from Bentonville, bringing gifts and tears of joy at seeing how well they were all doing. "Look at you," she said to Tessa, holding Jacob on her lap. "A wife, a mother, a rancher. I'm so proud of you, dear." "I couldn't have done any of it without Grant," Tessa said, watching her husband across the yard where he was showing some of the men a new foal. "That's what a good marriage is," Mrs. Fletcher said wisely. "Two people building each other up, making each other stronger. You found that, Tessa. Hold on to it." "I will," Tessa promised, "for the rest of my life." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing Grant to pay down his debt to Mr. Roberts ahead of schedule. They added to their herd, bought more land, improved the house and outbuildings. Grant's reputation as a fair boss and skilled rancher spread, and he had men coming from 3 counties away looking for work. Tessa gave birth to a daughter in 1883, a tiny, delicate thing they named Lily Marie. She had her father's features but her mother's temperament, calm and observant even as an infant. Jacob adored his little sister, appointing himself her protector and wanting to be involved in every aspect of her care. Another son followed in 1885, a big, boisterous baby they named Thomas, and then another daughter in 1887, sweet-natured Emma, who seemed to smile from the moment she was born. The house was full of noise and laughter and the constant chaos of children, and Tessa thrived in the midst of it all. Grant proved to be the father he had promised, patient, loving, always there. No matter how busy the ranch kept him, he made time for his children, teaching Jacob to ride, reading stories to Lily, playing blocks with Thomas, carrying Emma around on his shoulders. He and Tessa would lie in bed at night, exhausted but content, counting their blessings. "Can you believe this is our life?" Tessa said one night in the spring of 1888, curled up against Grant's side. "Sometimes I think about that day in the street when I was so scared and hopeless. I never imagined I could end up so happy." "I think about that day too," Grant said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, minding my own business. What if I had? What if I had never stopped? But you did stop. You saw someone who needed help and you helped, even though it cost you something." "Best thing I ever did," he said firmly. "Stopping for you, giving you my boots, standing up to that deputy, it changed the whole course of my life. It brought me you and this ranch and our children. It gave me everything I never knew I wanted. I love you," she said, the words as fresh and true as the day she had first spoken them. "I love you too. Always will." In 1890, when Jacob was 8 years old, Grant decided it was time to start teaching him about ranching in earnest. The boy was bright and eager, asking a million questions and soaking up knowledge like his father before him. Grant would take him out on rides, showing him the property lines, teaching him to read the land and the weather, explaining the business side of running a ranch. Tessa watched them ride off together one morning, Jacob sitting proudly on his pony beside Grant's big gelding, and felt her heart swell with love and pride. This was the legacy they were building, she realized. Not just land and cattle, but knowledge and values passed from one generation to the next. That same year, Mrs. Fletcher passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 73 years old, and she had lived a good, full life. But Tessa grieved deeply for the woman who had been like a mother to her. They made the trip to Bentonville for the funeral, bringing all 4 children. The town had grown and changed in the years since they had left, but the church on the hill was the same, and Reverend Thompson still presided over services. After the funeral, they walked through the town, and Tessa showed the children where she used to work, where their father had first carried her to safety. The seamstress shop had a new owner now, but the building looked the same. So did the courthouse, the general store, the boarding house where Grant had stayed. "This is where you met?" Jacob asked, standing in the middle of the main street. "Right here," Grant confirmed. "Your mother was the bravest person I'd ever seen, walking with her head held high even though she was being treated unjustly." "And you gave her your boots," Lily said. She had heard the story many times and never tired of it. "I did. Best trade I ever made." "It wasn't a trade," Tessa corrected, smiling. "It was a gift, the first of many gifts you've given me over the years." They left Bentonville the next day, heading home to the Triple J. As they drove, Tessa reflected on how much her life had changed since she had first arrived in this town, alone and scared and just trying to survive. She had found not just survival but abundance, not just safety but love, not just a place to live but a home. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Jacob proved to have his father's aptitude for ranching, while Lily showed a talent for numbers and took over managing the ranch's books by the time she was 12. Thomas was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book, talking about becoming a lawyer or maybe a teacher. Emma was their artist, drawing and painting everything she saw, capturing the beauty of the ranch in watercolors. In 1895, when Jacob turned 14, Grant sat him down for a serious talk. "Son, I know you're young yet, but I want you to understand something about this ranch. I built it for you and your sisters and your brother. Everything I've done, every decision I've made, has been with the goal of leaving you all something solid, something real. But it's not just about the land or the cattle. It's about the values: hard work, integrity, treating people fair. That's the real legacy." "I understand, Pa," Jacob said. "And I want to keep building on what you've started. I want to make you proud." "You already do, son. Every single day." That same year, the ranch faced its biggest challenge yet. A drought hit the region, the worst in memory, turning the grass brown and the creek to a trickle. Cattle began to die, and neighboring ranches started to fail. Grant worked around the clock, driving the herd to what little water remained, rationing resources, making impossible decisions about which animals to keep and which to sell at a loss. Tessa watched her husband age before her eyes that summer, the worry carving new lines in his face. She did what she could to help conserving water in the house, stretching their food supplies, keeping the children calm and occupied despite the tension. At night, she held Grant as he confessed his fears, his worry that he would lose everything he had worked so hard to build. "We'll get through this," she told him firmly. "We've survived worse. We'll survive this too. What if we don't? What if I lose the ranch, lose everything? Then we'll start over. Grant, I didn't fall in love with you because of this ranch or the money or the success. I fell in love with you because of who you are: a good man with a kind heart who stood up for a stranger when no one else would. That man is still here. That man can't be taken away by a drought or anything else." Her words steadied him, gave him the strength to keep fighting. And fight he did, with everything he had. He made deals with other ranchers to share water resources. He sold off part of the herd before they got too weak, taking less money than they were worth, but ensuring the remaining cattle would survive. He worked with his neighbors, organizing a cooperative to dig new wells and create water storage systems. The drought finally broke in September with a storm that rolled in from the west, bringing 3 days of steady rain that turned the parched earth dark and fertile again. Grant stood in the rain with his face turned up to the sky, letting the water wash over him, and Tessa stood beside him, holding his hand, both of them laughing with relief. They had survived. The ranch had survived. They were battered and diminished, but they were still standing. Recovery was slow, but by the following spring, the Triple J was back on solid footing. The grass grew thick and green, the herd began to rebuild, and the crisis faded into memory, though the lessons learned remained. In 1898, Jacob turned 17, a young man now, tall and broad-shouldered like his father. He had a sweetheart, a neighboring rancher's daughter named Annie, and Grant and Tessa could see a wedding on the horizon. Lily was 15, beautiful and clever, with 3 young men already vying for her attention. Thomas at 13 was still more interested in books than girls, and Emma at 11 was their baby, though she hated being called that. One evening in late summer, the whole family gathered on the front porch after supper, as was their custom. The children were talking and laughing, arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential. Grant and Tessa sat in their rocking chairs, hands clasped between them, watching their family with quiet contentment. "We did good," Grant said softly, so only Tessa could hear. "We did very good," she agreed. "You know what I was thinking about today? That first day when I gave you my boots. I remember looking at you and thinking you were the prettiest thing I'd ever seen, even covered in dust and frightened half to death. I remember thinking I would do anything to take that fear out of your eyes. You did take it away. You've spent our whole marriage taking it away, making me feel safe and loved and valued. That's all I ever wanted, to be a good husband to you, a good father to our children, to build something that mattered. You've done all that and more. Tessa squeezed his hand. Grant, I want you to know if I could go back to that day in the street, knowing everything that would happen after, I wouldn't change a single thing. Not the pain, not the fear, nothing. Because it all led to this, to us, to this life we've built. He turned to her, his gray eyes soft with emotion. I love you, Tessa Garrison. I loved you the moment I saw you walking down that street with your head held high. I'll love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, she said. Thank you for giving me your boots. Thank you for carrying me. Thank you for saving me in every way a person can be saved. He leaned over and kissed her, gentle and sweet, and their children groaned in mock disgust, making them both laugh. The sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the sky above the Triple J in colors so beautiful they took Tessa's breath away. Somewhere in the pasture, a calf bawled for its mother. In the barn, the horses settled in for the night. The creek burbled over stones, an endless song of water and life. This was home. This was family. This was love, enduring and true, built on a foundation of kindness and courage and two people who had chosen each other against all odds. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Tessa rested her head on Grant's shoulder and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrible day in Bentonville to this perfect evening on their own land, surrounded by their children and their dreams made real. She thought about the boots Grant had given her, worn now and kept in a trunk upstairs, a reminder of where they had started. She thought about how one act of kindness had changed two lives completely, creating ripples that would extend through generations. Jacob would inherit the ranch one day, and he would pass it to his children, and they to theirs. The story would be told and retold, becoming part of the family lore, the story of how their grandmother had been forced to walk barefoot through town, and how their grandfather had given her his boots and carried her to safety, and how that single moment of compassion had blossomed into a lifetime of love. But for now, in this moment, Grant and Tessa were content to simply be, to sit together in the gathering darkness, holding hands, listening to their children and counting their blessings. They had survived drought and hardship, doubt and fear. They had built a ranch from nothing, raised 4 children, created a legacy that would endure. Most importantly, they had loved each other well. They had kept their promises. They had been partners in every sense of the word, facing life's challenges side by side. As the moon rose over the Triple J Ranch, silver and full, Grant pulled Tessa closer. She sighed contentedly, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and horse and sun-warmed skin. This was where she belonged. This was who she was meant to be with. The years ahead would bring more challenges and more joys. They would see Jacob marry his Annie and start a family of their own in a house Grant built for them on the north section of the ranch. They would watch Lily fall in love with a rancher from Colorado and move away, though she would visit often with her growing brood of children. Thomas would indeed become a lawyer, moving to Little Rock, but returning every Christmas with stories of his cases and his adventures. Emma would marry a banker and settle in Bentonville, bringing her own children to visit the ranch where their mother had grown up. Grant and Tessa would grow old together, their hair turning silver, their faces weathering like the land they loved. They would sit on this same porch in their rocking chairs, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play in the yard. telling stories of the old days when the West was still wild, and two strangers met on a dusty street in Bentonville, Arkansas. Grant would die first at the age of 72, peacefully in his sleep with Tessa beside him. His last words would be, "I love you," and Tessa would hold his hand as he slipped away, grateful for every moment they had shared. She would live another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and strong-willed until the very end. On the day Tessa died, at 74, she would be lying in the bed she had shared with Grant for over 40 years. Jacob would be holding one hand, and Lily the other, with Thomas and Emma at the foot of the bed, and all her grandchildren crowded into the room, wanting to say goodbye. And as she took her last breath, she would be smiling, because she would see Grant waiting for her, young and strong again, holding out his hand just as he had done so many times before. But that was all in the future. Tonight they were still young enough, strong enough, filled with dreams and possibilities. Tonight they had everything they needed: each other, their children, their land, their love. "Come on," Grant said, standing and pulling Tessa to her feet. "Let's take a walk down to the creek. Moon's bright enough to see by. The children are old enough to manage for 20 minutes without us hovering," he finished, grinning. They walked hand in hand through the silvered landscape, their boots crunching on the gravel path. When they reached the creek, they stood on the bank and watched the water flow past, eternal and unchanging. Grant wrapped his arms around Tessa from behind, and she leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Happy?" He murmured into her hair. "Completely," she said. "Perfectly. Absolutely. Good. That's all I ever wanted." They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful together. The moon shone down, the creek sang its song, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the stars. This was their life. This was their love story. It had started with boots and a burden carried, with kindness shown when the world was cruel. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined: a partnership, a family, a legacy. And every day, for the rest of their days, Tessa would thank God for the cowboy who had stopped his horse on a hot August day in 1879 and said, "That's enough." The cowboy who had seen someone in need and helped without thought for the cost. The cowboy who had given her his boots and carried her to safety, and in doing so, had carried her heart as well. Grant would look back on that day and know it was the best decision he had ever made. Stopping for Tessa, standing up for her, loving her, it had given his life meaning and purpose. She had given him a home, not just a place but a feeling. She had given him children, a legacy, a reason to build instead of drift. They had given each other everything. As they walked back to the house, still hand in hand, they could see the warm glow of lamplight in the windows and hear the sounds of their children laughing inside. They paused at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at each other, really looked, seeing past the changes time had wrought to the people they had been when they met, young and scared and hopeful. "I'd do it all again," Grant said. "So would I," Tessa replied. They climbed the steps together and went inside, closing the door behind them on the night and the memories and the endless, star-swept sky. Inside was warmth and light and family, the things that mattered most. Inside was home. And somewhere in an old trunk upstairs, a pair of worn leather boots waited, a silent testament to the day everything changed. To the day a cowboy gave a barefoot woman his boots and carried her to safety. To the day two hearts recognized each other across the dust and the heat and the cruelty of the world and chose love instead. It was a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, a life worth living. And they lived it fully, gratefully together, from that first meeting in Bentonville to their last days on the Triple J Ranch, surrounded by the fruits of their love and labor. The end of their story was not an ending at all, but rather the beginning of a family line that would extend through generations, carrying forward the values Grant and Tessa had lived by: hard work, integrity, kindness to strangers, standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult, loving deeply and completely without reservation or regret. These were the gifts they left behind, more valuable than land or money or anything that could be counted or measured. These were the things that mattered, the things that endured. And it all started with a pair of boots and a burden carried, with a man who saw a woman in need and decided to help. That single choice, that moment of compassion, had created ripples that would extend far beyond anything either of them could have imagined on that hot August day in 1879. They had built a good life together, Grant and Tessa Garrison. They had loved well, raised their children with care, and left the world better than they had found it. They had been partners in every sense, supporting each other through trials and triumphs, never giving up, never letting go. And when people in Bentonville, Arkansas, told stories about the old days, they always included the tale of the seamstress and the cowboy, the public shaming that went wrong, and the love story that grew from boots given freely and a burden shared willingly. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that kindness mattered, that one person could make a difference, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil. It was a story that deserved to be told, remembered, celebrated. It was the story of Grant and Tessa, two people who found each other when they needed it most and held on tight through all the years that followed. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the Wild West, proving that even in harsh times and hard places, beauty and goodness could flourish. Their love had been tested by drought and hardship, by fear and uncertainty, but it had never wavered. It had been the constant in their lives, the foundation on which everything else was built. And in the end, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. This was their story, complete and whole from beginning to end. A story of redemption and romance, of courage and compassion, of two souls who recognized each other and refused to let circumstances keep them apart. A story that proved love was real, that happily ever after was possible, that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. Grant gave Tessa his boots, and she gave him her heart. It was a fair trade, the best either of them would ever make. And they lived out their days grateful for that exchange, for the moment their paths crossed and their lives intertwined, creating something beautiful and lasting from what had started as tragedy. In the end, love won. Kindness triumphed. And two people who might have remained strangers instead became everything to each other, building a life and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of true love. Their story was complete, their love fulfilled, their legacy secured. And it all began with boots and a burden, with a cowboy who stopped, and a woman who survived, with kindness shown and love discovered in the dusty streets of Bentonville, Arkansas on a hot summer day in 1879.